Hello and welcome to today's author webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Charlotte and I'm part of the Learning and Content Management team. Joining me today is my colleague Anitha, who will be hosting the session, and I will pass over to her shortly.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, the agenda for today. So we'll be starting by giving you a view of the author submission process in Editorial Manager. Please note that this may vary depending on journal configuration and the type of article being submitted. We'll also have a look at how when submitting a manuscript. Elsevier's declaration tool quickly and easily help authors create a comprehensive statement which incorporates the ICMJE, in other means International Committee of Medical Journal Editors Declaration Standards. So this declaration tool will produce a statement in a Word form loaded alongside your manuscript and will appear in your published article. Finally, we'll provide you a brief explanation of the various editorial statuses your submission may progress through in Editorial Manager. So now let's get into Editorial Manager site and explore the author submission process. But before that, please note I'm going to be using our training site for the demonstration with dummy users and dummy submissions. So the training site is a good replica of our live environment, but it will look slightly different to your own profile. So please don't worry if you see things today that you normally see when you log into your profile. This may due to the rights and permissions granted for each role that may vary from journal to journal. So now I'm just going to flip over my screen to Editorial Manager. I hope you're all able to see the Editorial Manager screen now. Now let's look into the author submission process. So before submitting a manuscript, please always click the journal requirements via the instruction to authors link. These instructions will contain guidelines on script word counts, file requirements, and other important information for your submission. And so it's really important to familiarize with the journal. Once ready to begin the submission process for your paper, please click on the Sub Manuscript. Okay, and you might end up in this screen where you might see some incomplete submissions, which was initiated by different authors. So you can just go down to the end of the screen and click on Start a New Manuscript if you're submitting it for the first time to your journal. So I have already prepared a test manuscript. So I'm just going to click on that and continue here. Please select the relevant article type from the dropdown. If you're submitting to a special issue, please ensure you select the appropriate special issue article type from the dropdown. The journal may request you to link to your ORCID ID, but that's not a mandatory step for every journal. Once you're ready, click Proceed. The system is a little slow in today. Just please bear with me for a minute. Okay. So now please attach all the files you wish to include within your submission in the Attach File step. You may use Browse to access your computer's file list or drag and drop a file from your computer to attach the primary file for your submission. First, primarily, please upload your primary manuscript file. So mandatory file types are indicated here within an asterisk. If you select research data when available for your journal, you will be asked to enter the URL where your data is hosted and provide additional information such as repository name and title of the dataset. In future, it will also become possible to upload data directly into Mendeley data. Please ensure the appropriate file type is selected for the individual files from the dropdown. You may edit the description of the item here, but please ensure not to use any personal identifiers. The system will automatically order your files into the order designated by the journal. For some journals, the declaration of interest might be a mandatory file type. So we will explain this in more detail in a few minutes, but in either event, such as a statement is mandatory from an ethics perspective. We also have a short video on using the declaration tool in Editorial Manager, and the link will now be posted in the chat window for you all. So once all of your files are uploaded, click on Proceed. The general information step will have different requirements depending on your journal. You may be asked to select the region of origin, section category, and classifications related to your submission. Classifications are fixed terms created for the journal. These are different from keywords. Keywords are free text that users can add in the manuscript data step. Once you have provided all the required information, click Proceed. Depending on your journal requirements, you will see different options on the reviewer preferences screen. You may have the option to request an editor to handle your paper, to suggest potential reviewers for your submission. You can add reviewers by clicking on this Add Suggested Reviewer, or to oppose reviewers who you would prefer not to review your submission. Please note that these are preferences only. The editor may or may not use the suggestions. Once you've provided all the necessary information in this step, you can click on Proceed. The additional information step presents you with a questionnaire which the journal uses to collect useful information. So please respond to each of these as appropriate. When you have answered all the questions, please click Proceed. The comments section gives you an opportunity to enter any additional comments for the journal office. These comments will not appear directly in your submission. Once you're done entering your comments, please click Proceed. So the system may automatically pull some data from the manuscript file attached to pre-populate fields on this manuscript data step. So required fields are marked with a red asterisk. You must check and verify the data or enter data manually. Please enter all the authors of the submission. By clicking on this Add Another Author. So you will have to fill in the name, current email address, institution, and select the contributor roles if applicable. Once you're done, click on Save. The system is showing that some required information is missing. Just click on that particular tab. Select the required data. Again, save it. You may reorder the author list by dragging and dropping an author to the correct position in the list. When all author details are entered, you can just go to the next option where you can find the funding information section. Please add the funding information for your research. And once you're done, click on Save. If you'd like to save and submit later, click on the button available here. If not, click on Build PDF for approval. The system is now trying to build PDF of our submission. It takes few seconds to refresh. So the PDF of your submission is built. Click on View Submission to access the PDF. Okay, the system is a little slow. Just give me a second. You must view the PDF to confirm that your files and information are correct. If changes are required, you can click on Edit Submission here from the Action column. Please ensure you read Ethics in Publishing and Elsevier terms and conditions and tick the I accept button here to indicate that you adhere to the guidelines. Finally, click Approve Submission. Sorry. And click on OK if you'd like to approve this submission. So your submission is now successfully submitted to the journal for consideration, and you will receive an email confirmation. Now, in this part of today's webinar, you're going to return to the submission process and look at the declaration tool in more detail. As we mentioned before, for some journals, this is a mandatory file type. Transparent disclosure of potential competing interest is essential to meeting your ethical obligations and nurturing trust in science. Elsevier now offers a declaration tool in Editorial Manager directly that quickly and easily help authors create a comprehensive statement which incorporates the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, or ICMJE, declaration standards. This statement can be uploaded as a Word document alongside your manuscript and will appear in your published article. So the declaration tool can be accessed through the journal's guide for authors, from the instruction for authors, as well as from the attach file step. So I'm just going to click back on the Submit New Manuscript again. So here, as I informed before, you can also access the declaration tool from the attach file step of your manuscript. Please click on the declaration tool link. You will be taken to the declaration tool homepage. Here you can read further information about declaring your interest, and when ready, begin your declaration. Please note that for some journals, I have nothing to declare button may be present and should obviously only be used to directly generate a statement when you're confident you and your co-authors have nothing to declare. So once you're ready reviewing this page, just go to the end of the page and click on Start My Declaration. On the first page, research support for this reported work, you declare any support you or any of your co-authors received from certain types of third parties since the initial conception of this research. Note that you don't need to list academic institutions or public funding resources from charitable foundations or government agencies here. You may fill in the details of this support by typing the organization name, and selecting any financial or non-financial support. If you need to add another funding source, you can just go to the end of the screen, click on Add Another Funding Source, and fill in the details. You will also need to add who received this support. If your research did not receive any additional support that should be declared, you may go up to the screen and use this toggle button off. If you'd like to save the declaration for later and come back to it within the next 30 days to continue later, you can use this button. If not, you can click on the next button, Other Support. Under the relevant support outside this reported work, you should disclose if you or any of your co-authors have any financial interest or personal relationships related to the subject matter, but not directly to the manuscript. The time frame for other support is within the last 3 years. Again, fill in all the relevant fields or toggle off if you have nothing to declare. Click the next intellectual property button to proceed. The patents and intellectual property page allows you to disclose any relevant patents or copyrights licensed to you or any of your co-authors. Once you have either filled this or press the toggle button, you can click on the next Other Activities button. The Other Activities is the final page of the declaration tool where you can submit any further information that a reader could perceive to have influenced the work that has not been covered in the previous pages. Once you've either filled this or toggled off, you can just click on the next button. This screen, Review Declaration, summarizes all the information you have provided. You may click Back button if you feel there is anything you want to add or edit, or click on Submit and Download if you're happy with the content. You will be offered an option to enter your email address to save your declaration statement. You will receive the same prompt if you wish to save your progress at any time while using the tool. If you do this, You will be prompted to enter a one-time password, and you can then download your declaration. You can also go back to this tool and download the declaration again for the next 30 days if you use this option. Alternatively, you can also click, "No thanks, I want to download a declaration," without saving it. So the declaration tool has now created a Word document using the information you entered, which can now be uploaded to the Editorial Manager as a Word document. I'm now just going to flip over my screen to the Editorial Manager step. And here we are in the Attach File step. So I'm just browsing the declaration file I just downloaded. Make sure you select the correct file type, Declaration of Interest, DOCI, in the drop-down item menu. You may then continue with your submission. If you saved your declaration, you can also access it from the home screen of the declaration tool for up to 30 days by clicking Access with One-Time Password. And if you want more information about this step, please watch our video using the declaration tool in Editorial Manager. And again, the link will be posted in the chat section now. So this is how you use the declaration tool in Editorial Manager. In the last part of this webinar, we'll give you a brief explanation of the various editorial statuses your submission may progress through in Editorial Manager. I'm just going to flip over my screen to the presentation again. I hope you're all able to see my presentation. Let's see how you can track your submission in Editorial Manager. An author finishes writing his paper and submits it to the journal. The system shows the status of the manuscript as manuscript submitted. Based on the workflow of the journal, the editorial office or the editor performs a technical check on your manuscript. The next step is assigning it to either the editor-in-chief or an associate editor for further handling. Journals usually have multiple associate editors who are experts in a particular niche within the broader subject area. Your manuscript will be handled by the editor who has the highest level of understanding and experience with your paper's research topic. An editorial office person checks the manuscript on the word count, manuscript format, figure quality, etc., and assigns it to the editor-in-chief or the handling editor for further handling. The status remains with the editor until the editor invites reviewers. Now, the handling editor has different action choices. Make a desk rejection, send the paper for revision, or invite reviewers. The editor conducts an initial screening of your paper and assesses it against several criteria such as novelty, priority, and scope. If your paper is a better match for another journal, you may be offered a manuscript transfer. Also, it's possible that your paper does not meet some of the assessment criteria, and then the editor will reject it before going into peer review. If the editor decides that your paper is a good match for the journal, then they will identify 2 or 3 independent reviewers, depending on the journal configuration, and then send them an invitation to review your manuscript. When the editor successfully invites reviewers, the status changes to under review. Once the required number of reviews are received and recommendations were submitted, the status of the manuscript shows as required reviews completed. The handling editor carefully studies the review reports. It can happen that the referee reports are conflicting, in which case the editor needs to find some additional reviewers. When this happens, your submission returns to the under review status. When the editor has received enough high quality feedback from the reviewers, they'll begin the decision-making process and move the status to decision in process. The decision may need to be confirmed by multiple editors in some journals. The manuscript then moves to the editor-in-chief's account. The editor-in-chief submits his or her decision. So these are the possible decision terms the editor-in-chief would have taken. Revise. The editor is requested that you revise the submission. You will find the details of the changes required and the deadline for your submission in the decision letter. Completed accept or reject. The submission process is completed with either an accept or reject decision. In the case of an accept decision, the manuscript will begin its production process and you will receive further information. Transfer pending. So the editor has now rejected your paper and suggested to transfer. The editor has recommended the submission be transferred to another journal via our automatic article transfer service, and you're offered a transfer. So we'll wait your response before proceeding. Submission transferred. So you accepted the transfer and the submission is now transferred to another journal. So thank you for listening to the content of today's session. We hope you found it useful. We're now going to spend a few minutes looking at some of the questions raised in today's session. And for that, I'll hand it over back to Charlotte. Charlotte, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Neetha. And thank you for guiding us through the content of that session today. So we've had one question raised that I would like to ask to you, Neetha. And while we do that, I invite the participants here today to put any questions that they may have now that they've seen the presentation into the Q&A field, which is on the bottom bar of your screen. And when you put your question in there, the team will be on hand, Sridevi, Jennifer and Ratika, to answer your question. And we will then move on to running another poll shortly. And I would thank you in advance for answering those questions as well. So Anita, the question we've had during the session was, sometimes my manuscript stays in under review status, but the corresponding status date changes several times. And the question is, what does each date change mean? Did one of the reviewers submit a comment or did the editor find a new reviewer?
Charlotte, I'm sorry, your voice is, or I didn't hear it properly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah. I think it's
okay
now.
So the question was, sometimes my manuscript stays in under review status, but the status date changes several times. So the status is the same, but the status date is being updated multiple times. And the question is what's happening at that point and why is the date changing, but not the actual status?
Okay, exactly. So there might be a few reviewers who've been invited, and the editor would have received a review from one of the reviewers, or the editor would have gone and invited additional reviewers for the paper based on the requirement. So yes, that's the reason the date changes and the status remains the same. Yeah. Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you, Anita. Great. I can see some other questions coming through on the Q&A now, which is great. Thank you to the team for answering those. I just want to confirm that we are recording the session and we will be sending a link to this recording. So if people would like to look back on the recording afterwards, we will send you that link as soon as it's ready. We've had another question come in that says, if my submission goes from with editor to decision in process in 10 days without undergoing review status, is my paper likely to be rejected? Anita, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So not necessarily that the paper should be rejected. Maybe the editor would have felt that the paper is really ready for publication with his or her own review. So if that's going to be the case, the editor would not have invited any additional reviewer, any reviewer for the, and the editor might take a decision by himself. So that's not necessarily be a reject decision. So the editor might also straight away accept the paper without inviting additional reviewers. Inviting reviewers, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so there is still hope. It may be a straightforward accept. And of course, it may be
exactly
a transfer offer, I guess, if that's applicable. It might be that the editor feels it's better placed with another journal and they may be preparing to offer a transfer offer to the author. Okay, so I hope that helps answer that question. Thanks, Anita. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming through on the Q&A field here. I'm just going to have a read of them. Okay, so the team are just busy answering those questions. While they do, I'd like to launch another poll now. And this is so that we can understand a little bit more about you as authors. If you missed the beginning of the session, I was saying that this is our very first author webinar, and we are really keen to learn a little bit more about you as authors so that we can better support you and improve and continue to deliver author webinars going forward this year. So the second poll that we're running today, and I'm just going to launch it now, is to learn a bit more about how this webinar has enhanced your understanding of the topics that we have covered. In the beginning of the session, we learned that people who had submitted hadn't yet used the declaration tool. So I hope that part of the session was really helpful for you. And I hope we've given a bit more information about the submission process and also how to check on your paper status. So if you could please just take a couple of minutes just to answer the questions that you'll see on your screen now, we'd be really grateful for that insight from you. Thank you. Okay, and I can see that we've got a question in the Q&A there that's talking about a paper that's been rejected and wanting to know, is there a way to know the reasons for the rejection and also possible to submit to the journal again? And I think although this is quite a journal specific question, and obviously there'll be decisions and thoughts from the editor that we don't know at this stage, but the decision letter should hopefully give you information about all decisions that are made. And we really encourage editors to give authors as much information as possible when they're making decisions and sending decision letters, because we know how helpful it is to you as authors to have that information to take away, to work on it, and to perhaps potentially resubmit at some point. In terms of resubmitting, Anita, you might be able to clarify on this. I feel like that's possibly a little bit more tricky, because once a paper has been rejected, you can't usually just resubmit in that way. I think if the editor sees potential in a paper, they would perhaps ask you to revise it rather than rejecting it. My understanding is that a reject decision is generally the end of the submission process. And if you wanted to resubmit, you would have to significantly change that submission in order for it to be considered again by the journal.
Exactly, Charlotte. Yeah, that would be the case. So the editor might ask for additional information to actually again process the paper for the journal. So yeah, the author would need to definitely provide an additional comments, or completely change the data, the current data, and resubmit it in a format which the editor-in-chief would require for the journal so that it can be processed further.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and then we had a question about the difference between journals, so journal submission. And yes, we should definitely clarify that each journal is different in the terms of the submission process. We try to make the submission process as standard and as easy as possible for authors. So what we've seen today will be very similar to what you experience when you submit to any journal. However, there will be differences as part of the journal submission, because different journals will require different information as part of their submission process. The question here talks about the declaration tool, and I just wanted to add a note about the declaration tool that you may not have experienced it yet using that tool. You may not have been asked for the declaration document yet, but it's very likely that you will going forward, because we are rolling that out to all journals eventually. So that will be something you will encounter as part of your submission process, no matter what journal you are submitting to. Okay, those were the open questions we had. Thank you to those who've filled in the poll. Only a few people have. If there's anyone on the call that would like to complete the poll now, we'd be really grateful. We're seeing some nice high scores though. So we're asking people in the poll about how their understanding of the different parts of the session, the topics have changed, and we're seeing some really nice high scores there. So that's really encouraging for us. Thank you. And we have also asked you a little bit about what else you might like to see. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'll leave the poll open. I'll leave it running. Please do give us your thoughts, give us your feedback, because that will shape the next author webinar that we run. And we hope to make this a regular provision from the LCM team going forward. So you might need to attend again. You might like to attend in a couple of months and see if there's any new information that we have to share. And certainly other authors will find this helpful now that we are doing these webinars, and we'll be making recordings available as well. Okay, we've got a question that's just come in that someone has submitted 5 months ago, but to this day there is no first decision. The status says under review. What can I do to accelerate the process? Firstly, I'm sorry that you've been waiting so long. I can only assume that you've submitted to a very busy journal, and unfortunately we do see long turnaround times on manuscript statuses from time to time. It's something that we are always actively working towards on the editorial side. So we're working with editors, we're working with reviewers as much as we can to try and keep the process moving. Sometimes it's because the journal is very busy and editors have a very high workload. Sometimes it's because it's difficult to secure reviewers. We have to have a certain number of reviewers complete a review before we can say that we've peer reviewed that paper and progress to the next step. And sometimes it is very difficult to get reviewers to commit and submit a review. So that's an area that we're looking at. If you perhaps contact the journal mailbox or the journal manager, they might be able to look into your individual submission and perhaps give you a little bit more information about exactly what's been going on. And you might find that several reviewers have been unavailable, and that's been the problem. So given that it's been 5 months, I would encourage you to contact the journal via the mailbox, and hopefully you'll see some progression on that soon. I would say that's probably one of the extreme cases, waiting 5 months for any kind of action there. Okay, we've had another question. After submitting a paper, I have noticed some typo and missing references in the reference list. Can I change this after getting comments from reviewers? So yes, is the short answer to that. Depending on the decision that the editor makes, depending on the comments from the reviewers, the paper will pass back to you perhaps for a revision. And if it doesn't pass back to you for a revision, it may be that it's been accepted, and the editor might ask you just to make some small corrections before it goes on to the production stage. So yes, there is a chance to make corrections of that type, depending on how the rest of the process goes. Okay, so I think Anita will move on to the next slide for those who wish to leave the call shortly. If anyone does have any more questions, please do put them in the Q&A field. The team are still on hand here to answer any more questions that we have come through. So this does bring us to the end of our session today. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. And I'd like to extend my thanks to Anita for guiding us so expertly through the session today. And my thanks to the colleagues from the Learning and Content team for being here and supporting the session today. After the session, we will send you an email that will contain some helpful links, including the webinar recording and also the short video guides that relate directly to the topic today. One of those is about the declaration tool. Another is about checking the status of your submission, and the other is about the submission process in general. And they are all short video guides that you can refer to help you with your submission process. So please do look out for that email. And with that, I will say thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again.